A single father and his daughter returned from school to find their house on fire. Everything was destroyed in the flames. But when the truth about who was behind the arson came to light, it shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city you are watching from. The neighborhood was ordinary in every sense. A cluster of tired apartment blocks and small detached homes pressed together between long, narrow streets. The kind of place where people worked modest jobs, children filled the playgrounds with laughter, and neighbors carried the scent of cooking into the evening air when they opened their windows. It was not glamorous, but it was real, and for Alexei and his 8-year-old daughter Lisa, it was the only world that mattered. They had built their own fragile kind of happiness here, surrounded not by wealth, but by routine, by little rituals that bound their days together. Alexei was a man molded by labor. His hands carried the permanent ink of grease and machine oil. His back bent slightly from hours spent beneath cars in the auto repair shop where he worked. Life had given him few luxuries, but he had long since learned to value consistency and honesty over extravagance. Each evening he would return from work with fatigue carved into the lines of his face, and yet when he opened the door to their small house, something in him softened. The sight of his daughter bent over her homework at the table, her pencils scattered across the surface like tiny flags of imagination, gave him a strength that work alone could not. Their home stood modestly among the row of low houses on the street, unremarkable to strangers, but sacred to them. The paint on the wooden fence had begun to peel, and the roof had weathered too many storms, but the house breathed with the warmth of their lives. Lisa had taped her colorful drawings onto the kitchen wall, bright shapes and figures that gave life to the otherwise plain interior. There was a rug her father had salvaged from a second-hand store, worn but still patterned, and the faint smell of cinnamon lingered from the tea he brewed in the evenings. Their mornings were simple but filled with ritual. Alexei would rise before dawn, put water to boil for coffee that was cheap and bitter, and wake his daughter gently with a call from the doorway. She would stumble sleepily into the kitchen, her hair tousled, and sit at the table while he made her a sandwich with whatever he could find, sometimes cheese, sometimes only butter. He tied her scarf against the wind in winter and smoothed her hair with his calloused palm, as though each gesture was both armor and blessing. Then he walked her to school when time allowed, or she skipped along beside him as he headed toward the bus stop, her chatter filling the spaces that his silence often left. That day began like any other, wrapped in the comforting blanket of routine. Lisa had packed her books carefully into her bag, and Alexei had scolded himself for forgetting to buy fresh bread, promising her something better when he came home. She smiled anyway, because for her the weight of life was softened by the assurance that he would always be there, steady and unshakable. He left her at school, lingering a moment longer than usual as she disappeared into the crowd of children, then trudged toward work with the heavy rhythm of someone who has no choice but to keep moving. The hours passed in a haze of noise and machinery at the repair shop. Cars came and went, customers impatient. The smell of gasoline thick in the air. Alexei barely noticed the sky darkening with a haze of smoke in the distance, or the faint sirens echoing far away. For him, the world was narrowed to the stubborn bolts that refused to loosen, and the clock that told him when to collect his daughter. In the afternoon he was there, waiting outside the school gates as the children streamed out in clusters. Lisa spotted him quickly and ran, her ponytail bouncing, her face lit by the innocent joy of returning home. She told him about her lessons, about how she had drawn a picture of their house in art class, with herself smiling in the window. He listened, nodding with the gentle pride of a man who found his own worth in her laughter. They took the familiar route back, weaving between the parked cars and cutting across the courtyard where pensioners always sat gossiping on the benches. Then the world shifted. The first hint was the acrid taste of smoke on the wind. Lisa noticed it before he did, wrinkling her nose. The sound of sirens grew louder, no longer distant, but pressing closer, mingled with shouts carried on the breeze. They turned the corner and saw the glow of fire, the thick plume of smoke rising above the rooftops. At first, Alexei's mind refused to register the connection. Fires happened, but always to someone else, somewhere else. His steps quickened, pulling Lisa by the hand as they approached the growing crowd that had gathered at the edge of the street. Then the truth came into focus, brutal and undeniable. Their house, the place that held every memory of their life together, was engulfed in flames. The fire roared with a hunger that consumed everything in its path, the roof collapsing inward in a shower of sparks, windows bursting outward as the heat surged. Firefighters battled desperately, their hoses spraying arcs of water that hissed and evaporated before reaching the heart of the blaze. The air was thick with ash and the smell of burning wood, choking and heavy. Lisa froze, her eyes wide with disbelief, then let out a cry so raw it pierced the noise of the crowd. She pulled toward the house as if her small arms could retrieve her toys, her books, the drawings she had taped on the walls. Alexei caught her, holding her tightly though his own legs trembled. He felt as though the ground had been cut away beneath him, his chest hollowed by a loss too vast to comprehend. In his hand was still her school bag, swinging uselessly from the strap, the last unburned piece of their ordinary life. Neighbors muttered in shock, some placing hands over their mouths, others filming with their phones as if the tragedy were a spectacle. A woman brought a blanket and tried to wrap it around Lisa, who sobbed into her father's chest, her small body shaking with grief. Alexei could not speak. His throat was scorched by smoke and silence, his eyes fixed on the collapsing walls that had once sheltered their laughter and their sleep. When the flames finally weakened under the relentless assault of water, what remained was nothing more than a blackened skeleton of the house. The fence was gone, the windows hollow, the rooms they had filled with life now reduced to cinders. The firefighters moved with weary efficiency, their boots crunching over smoldering wood, their faces grim from experience. For them, this was another fire, another casualty of chance or carelessness. But for Alexei, it was the end of everything he had built. He stood rooted to the spot, numb, while neighbors spoke softly around him, their words meaningless noise in the haze of despair. His daughter clung to him, her cheeks streaked with tears, her voice hoarse from crying. He held her as if she were the only thing tethering him to the earth, the only reason he had not collapsed into the ashes beside their home. That night they did not sleep in their own beds, for those no longer existed. They were offered shelter by a neighbor, a kind woman who made tea and pressed clean clothes into their hands. But the comfort was paper thin. Lisa's eyes searched for her room, her toys, the walls where she had hung her drawings, and found only the strange furniture of someone else's home. Alexei sat awake long after she had cried herself into a fitful sleep, staring at the ceiling, his hands clenched together. In the silence of that borrowed room, he felt the crushing weight of failure. He had promised himself to protect her, to give her stability, and now he stood with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The fire had devoured not only wood and plaster, but the fragile sense of safety they had clung to. Yet even in his despair, one truth burned brighter than the flames had. His daughter was alive, pressed against him, breathing. The house could be lost, possessions turned to ash, but she remained. And as he looked at her, her small hand curled against his arm, even in restless sleep, Alexei understood that survival meant more than enduring fire. It meant enduring the emptiness that followed, the silence where laughter had once lived. Tomorrow the questions would come: where to go, how to start again. But for that moment he allowed himself only to breathe and to feel the hollow echo of the place that had been their home. The ashes of the house still smoldered across the street, unseen in the night, but he carried them within him. They were the weight of loss, the mark of an ending that would demand a beginning he could not yet imagine. The night after the fire left Alexei hollowed out, as if the flames had not only consumed wood and plaster, but also stripped away the layers of his resolve. He woke in the borrowed bed of his neighbor's apartment to the muffled sound of his daughter stirring beside him, her breath still trembling with the echoes of nightmares. For a brief instant, in that hazy space between sleep and waking, he expected to hear the familiar creak of their old house settling, the kettle whistling faintly on the stove, the rustle of Lisa's drawings pinned to the kitchen wall. But when he opened his eyes, there was only the strange ceiling, the unfamiliar smell of someone else's soap, and the unbearable reminder that everything recognizable had been turned into ash. The following days blurred into a series of makeshift shelters and quiet humiliations. For a time they stayed with the neighbor, whose kindness could not soften the reality of intrusion. Alexei was grateful but restless, unable to shake the feeling that he was an intruder in a space not meant for him. Lisa clung to him, asking questions he could not answer, her eyes searching for toys and books that no longer existed. When it became clear they could not remain as guests indefinitely, he found a room for rent in a worn-down apartment block at the edge of the district. The room was small, suffocatingly so, with faded wallpaper and a sagging bed that creaked with every movement. The air smelled faintly of dampness and old tobacco, and though it offered a roof, it could not offer the warmth of home. Lisa's world shrank in that room. She slept on a narrow mattress pushed against the wall, the thin blanket hardly enough to keep away the chill of the nights. Her drawings now filled scraps of paper scavenged from old notebooks, taped to the peeling walls in a futile attempt to make the space their own. Alexei sat up at night, watching her small figure curl into sleep, his chest heavy with guilt. Each day he worked longer hours, taking every job he could find, his body driven to exhaustion, not by ambition, but by necessity. His hands, already rough from years of labor, grew raw from extra shifts spent unloading goods at night, repairing old engines by dim light, or lifting heavy crates in warehouses that smelled of dust and gasoline. Despite the relentless fatigue, he felt no closer to regaining what they had lost. Money trickled in, but vanished just as quickly, devoured by rent, food, and the endless, small expenses of survival. He often returned with only enough to buy bread and soup, apologizing with downcast eyes while Lisa forced a smile she was too young to carry. Her resilience wounded him more deeply than her tears, for it showed him that she was learning to endure, to suppress the ache of wanting more. That was not what he wanted for her childhood, but it was what life had forced upon them. The ruin of their old home remained a silent monument to their loss. Alexei returned there often, not out of masochism, but because it was the only place that still belonged to them, no matter how broken. The smell of burned wood still lingered even after rain had soaked the ground, and the blackened skeleton of the house stood against the sky like the bones of a once living creature. He would stand at the edge of the lot, his boots sinking into the ash, and imagine the rooms as they had been. The kitchen with its chipped table, the bedroom where Lisa had hung her paper stars, the narrow hallway filled with her laughter. All of it gone, yet all of it alive in memory. It was in one of these moments, while staring at the ruins, that he made the decision that would shape the months to come. He would not abandon this ground. He would not surrender to chance or to despair. He would build a new home on the same soil, even if it meant dragging every beam into place with his bare hands. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. It offered him a mission, a way to turn grief into motion, a way to give Lisa not just shelter, but proof that nothing could destroy the bond between them. The task was monumental. He had neither savings nor professional equipment, only the determination etched into his muscles from years of labor. He began by clearing the debris, lifting charred planks and shattered glass, carting them into piles with the help of borrowed tools. The work was slow, punishingly so, but it gave him focus. Each beam carried away felt like a battle won, each corner of cleared ground like a small victory reclaimed from fate. He returned to the rented room at night with his body screaming in pain, his clothes reeking of smoke and sweat. But for the first time since the fire, he felt something akin to purpose. Lisa accompanied him when she could, her small hands offering what help they could manage. She carried light objects, picked through the ash for anything salvageable, and watched him with wide, determined eyes. One afternoon she presented him with a drawing, more elaborate than the others. Their new house, bright and intact, with her standing in front of it, smiling. Alexei felt something break open in his chest when he saw it. He pinned the drawing to the side of the makeshift shed where he kept tools, treating it as if it were a blueprint more valuable than any architectural plan. For her, the drawing was a promise. For him, it became a vow. The neighbors, at first only curious observers, began to offer their support in quiet, practical ways. A man from down the street arrived with leftover planks from a renovation. A woman brought nails and screws collected from her husband's old workshop. Others offered advice, a lending hand, or simply encouragement. Though Alexei was a private man, accustomed to bearing burdens alone, He could not deny the strange comfort of this communal effort. Their gestures reminded him that even in a world of loss, people reached out to one another, binding themselves together against despair. Still, the weight of the task pressed heavily upon him. Nights became endless, his body often collapsing into sleep before he could undress. His dreams filled with images of both flames and construction. He measured progress not in days but in beams set upright, walls rising slowly from the ground. Rain soaked the exposed wood, forcing him to begin again. His hands split and bled from hammering, but he pressed on, driven by the image of his daughter sleeping safely within walls he had raised. Lisa's faith in him grew alongside the fragile skeleton of the new home. She spoke excitedly of where her bed would go, of how she wanted curtains with flowers, of how she would hang her drawings in the new kitchen. He listened, absorbing her words like nourishment, even as doubt gnawed at him in the silence of the night. Could he truly rebuild? Could he restore what had been stolen from them? The questions lingered, but the alternative, doing nothing, was unthinkable. The burden was not only of labor, but of guilt, of the constant voice reminding him that he had failed once already to protect her from loss. Each blow of the hammer carried the weight of that guilt. Each plank lifted the memory of fire. Yet within that burden lay a strange strength, a relentless drive that would not let him falter. He was building not just a house but a future, a sanctuary carved from ruin. As the days turned into weeks, the structure began to resemble a home again, though still skeletal and fragile. Passers-by could see the outlines of rooms, the rising shape of a roof, the possibility of renewal. For Alexei, each nail driven into the wood was a silent declaration. They would not be erased. They would not be cast aside. He had lost nearly everything, but he still had his daughter, and for her he would move mountains or, at the very least, raise walls from ashes. The burden remained immense, threatening to crush him with fatigue and despair, but it was also the force that propelled him forward. He could not yet see the end, but he could see the next step, and then the next. And for now, that was enough. The new walls rose slowly, pale timber against the gray sky, and with them came a fragile sense of order. For weeks, Alexei had poured every ounce of his strength into this fragile frame, his body aching, yet strangely alive with purpose. Lisa's laughter returned in fleeting bursts, her eyes brightening when she saw the outline of a window where her drawings would someday hang again. There were still nights when exhaustion pressed him into the mattress and doubt swirled like smoke in his chest. But for the first time since the fire, the future did not seem like a void. It seemed possible, however distant, that they might once again live in a place they could call their own. But even as hope stirred, shadows gathered at the edges of his progress. It began with the visit from the fire investigator, a man whose expression carried the grim detachment of one who had seen too many ruins. He spoke in measured tones, examining the remnants of the old house with practiced eyes, and Alexei followed him wordlessly, his heart heavy with a dread he could not name. The man pointed out details that Alexei had not considered: the speed of the fire's spread, the way certain beams had burned, the traces of a substance along the foundation that should not have been there. Alexei listened, his jaw tightening as the words formed a truth he had not wanted to imagine. This had not been an accident of faulty wiring or careless chance. The fire had been set. The knowledge sank into him like ice. At first he dismissed it, clinging to disbelief, but the image would not leave his mind. Who would do such a thing? Who would watch a house burn, knowing a child might have been inside? He found himself turning the thought over endlessly, the weight of suspicion pressing down on him with suffocating force. He tried to bury it under labor, swinging the hammer harder, digging his hands into the work until they bled. But the unease lingered. Soon after, whispers reached him from the neighborhood. People had seen someone near the house on the day of the fire. A woman who had passed through quickly, her presence noted only in hindsight when the flames erased everything. At first it was only rumor, vague and uncertain, but the more he heard, the more the shape of the figure solidified: his former wife. The thought struck him with a sickening clarity. He remembered her sudden appearances in the past, the bitter arguments during the custody hearings, the promises she had made in anger that she would not let him keep Lisa, that she would find a way to prove he was unfit. At the time, he had dismissed her words as spiteful threats, born of frustration and wounded pride. But now, staring at the blackened earth where his daughter's toys had once been scattered, he wondered if those threats had been more than words. Memories of their life together rose unbidden. He recalled the years before the separation, when hope had flickered between them but had been smothered by her restless spirit, her inability to remain steady in the face of responsibility. She had drifted between jobs, between fleeting dreams, while he had shouldered the weight of their survival. When the court had asked where Lisa would be safer, the answer had been clear, and the ruling had reflected it. She had wept that day, not for the child she claimed to love, but for the loss of control, for the judgment that marked her unfit. He had not seen her since, not truly, though occasionally he felt her presence like a ghost at the edge of their lives. The investigator's report confirmed what the whispers had already carved into his mind. The fire had been deliberate, fueled by accelerants. The evidence, still under review, pointed to arson. And as if fate wished to strip him bare of denial, a neighbor produced a recording from a security camera 2 streets away. The grainy footage showed a figure walking briskly in the direction of his house on the day of the fire, a figure unmistakably female. The image was not sharp enough to show her face, but the posture, the hair, the coat. Alexei knew them all too well. He had seen them in court, in memories he tried to bury. The realization crushed him. It was not enough that life had torn their home apart with fire. It was not enough that his daughter had been forced to cry into strange pillows at night, clinging to scraps of normalcy. It had been orchestrated, born from malice that cared nothing for the child caught in its wake. His former wife had tried to destroy their foundation, not with words but with fire, believing that without a roof he would lose the right to raise his daughter. The cruelty of it left him trembling with rage. But beneath the fury lay something worse: despair. He could not bring himself to tell Lisa. How could he? To reveal that the woman who had given her life had also tried to burn away her safety was unthinkable. Lisa still asked about her mother sometimes, timidly, her eyes searching his face for answers he could not give. She remembered moments of affection, fragments of warmth, the idea of a mother that clung to her heart. To strip that away would be to shatter her innocence entirely. So he said nothing, bearing the knowledge alone, his silence a shield he hoped would protect her, even as it poisoned him from within. The burden grew heavier each day. He hammered nails into wood while his mind replayed the footage, imagined her hands striking the match, her eyes watching as flames devoured the life he had built. He wanted to hate her, to erase her from their story, but hatred was not clean. It tangled with pity, with memories of who she had once been, with the unanswerable question of how love could curdle into such cruelty. And always at the center was Lisa, her small figure bending over new drawings in their rented room, her belief in him absolute. At night, when the work was done and his body ached with exhaustion, Alexei lay awake, torn between choices that offered no peace. Should he fight openly, bring the truth into the light, let the court see the evidence and condemn her fully? Or should he bury it, protect Lisa from the knowledge that her mother had become her enemy? Either path carried a cost. One would strip Lisa of illusions, the other would place her in danger of betrayal again. The walls of the new house rose higher, but within him walls crumbled. The weight of labor no longer seemed the greatest trial. It was the weight of silence, the crushing knowledge that their suffering had been inflicted deliberately. The shadows of the past stretched long across the ground he was trying to reclaim. Yet he did not stop. Each day he returned to the site, lifted beams, secured foundations, set new walls upright. If his rage threatened to consume him, he channeled it into the work, striking nails with a force that echoed like thunder. If despair whispered that nothing would be enough, he drowned it with sweat and motion. He built not only for survival, but as defiance, as a statement to the world and to the woman who had sought to destroy him. He would not yield. Lisa sensed the heaviness in him, though he tried to hide it. She asked fewer questions about her mother and more about the future, about curtains and flower pots, about the dog she wished they could have when the house was finished. He smiled and nodded, letting her words carry him forward, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. He knew that someday the truth would have to be faced, that silence could not shield her forever. But for now he clung to the fragile hope that the house itself, once rebuilt, would stand as proof of resilience. The shadow of the past loomed large, and the pain of betrayal gnawed at him with every passing day. But even in the depths of his turmoil, Alexei understood one thing with perfect clarity. He had already lost a home once. He would not lose his daughter. No fire, no court, no malice would take her from him. And if he had to carry the secret like a stone in his chest to protect her, then so be it. The house grew taller, the roof line beginning to take shape against the horizon. But behind every plank and every nail, behind every word of encouragement from neighbors and every smile from his daughter, there lingered the unspoken truth. The fire had not been an accident. It had been the shadow of the past reaching forward, trying to snatch away the future. And though Alexei pressed on, his hands steady and his eyes fixed on the work, he knew the shadow had not finished with them. The weeks that followed dragged heavily across Alexei's shoulders, yet each day the skeleton of the house grew stronger. The roof beams stretched upward against the gray sky, and the outline of windows marked the promise of rooms not yet lived in. The air was filled with the scent of freshly cut timber and damp soil, a smell that clung to his skin and clothing, no matter how many times he washed. Every nail struck into place felt like a small declaration of resistance. Every board lifted another weight set against the shadows of betrayal. He worked not only with his hands, but with the raw fuel of fury and determination, driving himself to exhaustion until the ache in his muscles became as constant as the beating of his heart. The knowledge of who had set the fire remained locked within him, a secret that pressed against his ribs like a hidden wound. He carried it into each motion of his labor, into every conversation with neighbors, into every careful glance at his daughter. The truth burned quietly, an ember threatening to spark into flame if exposed. Yet he remained silent, forcing his anger and sorrow into the structure he raised before him. This silence was not weakness, but protection, a shield between Lisa and the cruelty of knowing that her mother had chosen destruction over love. She still spoke of her with a kind of innocent longing, remembering fragments of gentleness that had existed once. To take that away would be to crush something inside her that could not be rebuilt, and Alexei refused to do that. Not yet. Winter crept closer as the house neared its completion. Frost rimmed the mornings, and his breath came in visible clouds as he worked. His hands, raw and cracked from cold, tightened around the tools with unyielding resolve. He accepted whatever help was offered, though he rarely asked for it. Neighbors came and went with supplies, an old window frame, a stack of tiles, leftover paint. Their gestures became threads in the fabric of the new home, each piece carrying the quiet weight of kindness. Lisa spent hours outside, wrapped in scarves and mittens, sketching the new rooms in her notebook, her eyes filled with anticipation. She would point to where her bed should be, where she wanted to keep her books, where she imagined a vase of flowers on a windowsill. Her vision became the compass that guided him, her voice a reminder of why he lifted each beam, why he endured each night of sleeplessness. The day finally came when the house stood, not fully finished, but whole enough to welcome them inside. The walls enclosed them against the wind, the roof stood firm above their heads, and the floor beneath their feet was new, clean, untainted by fire. The smell of wood was fresh and sharp, a scent of beginnings. For the first time in many months, Alexei felt the fragile stirrings of peace. Lisa wandered through the rooms with wide eyes, touching the walls as though she could anchor herself to them, whispering the names she wanted to give to each space. That night, she curled beneath a blanket in the room her father had built for her, her drawings taped once more onto clean walls. Her breathing softened into sleep, and Alexei stood in the doorway, watching her with a heaviness in his chest that was equal parts grief and relief. The house was more than shelter. It was a promise kept, a vow fulfilled. But the burden of truth still waited. The authorities concluded their investigation, and the case was brought before the court. Evidence was presented, witnesses called, and though Alexei dreaded the process, he attended each session with grim determination. His former wife sat across the courtroom, her eyes downcast, her expression unreadable. The judge reviewed the proof. The accelerant traces, the footage, the testimony, and the conclusion was unavoidable. She had sought to manipulate the custody battle with fire, believing that by stripping him of a home, she could claim their daughter for herself. The judgment was harsh but just. She would face punishment for her crime, and the court reaffirmed what had already been decided years earlier. Lisa would remain with her father. When the verdict was read, Alexei felt no triumph. Only a dull ache remained, a sorrow for what could have been if love had not soured into destruction. He left the courthouse with Lisa holding his hand, her small fingers warm against his palm, and he resolved once more never to burden her with the full truth. She knew only that her mother could not be with her, that the court had spoken, and that her place was with him. Her eyes carried confusion and sadness, but not the sharp wound of betrayal. For now, that was enough. Life in the new house began slowly, cautiously, as though each step needed to test the ground for stability. At first, the rooms felt too clean, too bare, their silence echoing with memories of laughter lost. Yet day by day they filled the spaces. Lisa taped her new drawings on the refrigerator, brought home small treasures from school, and arranged her books on the shelf her father had built from spare planks. Alexei cooked simple meals, their aroma softening the air with comfort. Neighbors visited, bringing gifts of food or small furnishings, their presence weaving the house into the fabric of the community. Each gesture reminded Alexei that he was not as alone as he had believed on the night of the fire. Still, quiet moments carried a weight he could not ignore. In the evenings, he often sat on the porch, a mug of tea in his hands, watching the sky darken above the neighborhood. The streetlights flickered on, casting a familiar glow across the pavement, and children's voices drifted from the playground. He thought of the fire, of the nights in the rented room, of the exhaustion and despair. The memory did not vanish, but it no longer consumed him. The new house stood behind him, walls solid, roof secure, a testament to survival. Lisa would come out sometimes, curl up beside him with her blanket, and together they would listen to the sounds of life returning to normal. There were moments when the ache of betrayal returned sharply, when he remembered the face of the woman who had once shared his life and the destruction she had wrought. He knew that someday Lisa would need to understand more, that the truth could not be buried forever, but he also knew that there was no need to rush the moment. Childhood was already fragile, already scarred by loss, and he would give her as many days of innocence as he could before the weight of truth settled on her shoulders. His duty was not only to protect her body from harm, but to guard her spirit from the shadows of bitterness. Time passed, and the house became more than wood and nails. It became laughter at breakfast when Lisa spilled milk across the table. It became the soft hum of the radio in the kitchen, the warmth of the stove in winter, the quiet rustle of pages when she read before bed. The scars of fire did not vanish, but they were covered by layers of life, by moments of ordinary joy stitched together until the memory of loss softened into something less sharp. Alexei found that he, too, could breathe easier, that the tightness in his chest loosened when he heard her laugh or when he saw the drawings she proudly taped above her bed. On a spring evening, when the air was filled with the smell of earth waking from frost and the sound of neighbors repairing their own gardens, Alexei and Lisa sat together on the porch. The house stood solid behind them, the fruit of endless labor and sleepless nights. She leaned against him, her head resting on his arm, holding a small toy that one of the neighbors had given her. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment the world seemed still. Alexei looked at the horizon and then at the child beside him, and he understood what the fire had failed to take. The house might have been consumed, possessions lost, but the essence of family remained. Home was not in the wood or the stone, not in the possessions that could be turned to ash in a single night. Home was in the trust between them, in the warmth of her hand in his, in the unspoken promise that he would never let her face the world alone. The new walls rose as proof of resilience, but the true strength lay in the bond that no flame could consume. And as night settled gently around the neighborhood, Alexei felt a quiet certainty settle within him. They had endured, they had survived, and together they would live again. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Be sure to check out our other videos for more powerful stories and stay tuned for what's coming soon. And please share this video with your friends and family. Some stories are too meaningful to keep to yourself.